We are in week 2 of Anthropology, so let's just back up and review what is anthropology, at least as it concerns theology. We're not talking about anthropology, the study of mankind and cultures and all that sort of thing. From a secular point of view, we're talking about systematic theology's version or biblical anthropology. And so it is the study of humanity, but particularly as humans, as we, as it, sorry for the pronoun problem, relates to God. So that's what it is. And we looked at kind of the key verse last week that informed really all that we talked about is from Genesis. Then God said, "Let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So that was kind of our verse that really informed all that we said. And we looked at 3 main points. Number one, we're trying to get a baseline human, who are humans as we relate to God. The first thing we need to know is humans are created by God. So vitally important. He is the creator. We are the creation. God's quality, God's nature, as we said, is independent self-existence, aseity, if you remember that word from a few weeks ago. He exists independently above us, and he creates us. And specifically, we are created in the image of God. And we spent quite a bit of time talking about this, the Latin phrase, the imago Dei. And if you remember, I want to reiterate this because of what we're going to talk a lot about tonight. This is the fundamental reality of what it means to be human. Humans are created in the image of God. We want to begin, we want to put the base, and we want to put the foundation that we build on. We have to begin here. What we'll talk about in point number 4 when we get to it is where a lot of people want to begin and where a lot of times in church world we hammer away at it. But this is it, that every human being created in the image of God has inherent worth and dignity and value. And so that's where we start with that baseline assumption. The key implication, I think I put this in your notes, is that we have the capacity to relate to God. What that means, there's a lot of implications of this, but the key one is, made in his image, we can have a relationship with God. And then number 3, humans are created as vice regents of God. So it's in that same verse, if we back up. Let us make man in our image and our likeness for a purpose. Why did God create mankind in his image? Because here's why I did it. So that mankind may rule over the fish in the sea, the birds of the sky, over the livestock, and all the wild animals that move along the ground. So part of what it means to be made in the image of God is we have those communicable attributes, to go back to our study of theology proper, that we receive, that then we are God's representatives, as it were. The image of God is vice regents charged with creation. Now, this is important, and this is something that I didn't talk about last week, but occurred to me as I was kind of summing up. Here, this is important because most, I think it's fair, or at least a lot of theology as it relates to eternity in the last several decades has been of the variety that we can't wait to get out of here. That this world is so messed up and so horrible that we want to fly away to the sweet by and by and have the roll called up yonder. But we, in doing that, neglect some of the important realities of creation, namely that when God made creation, what did he say over and over and over again? And it was good, and it was good, and it was good. This is God's good earth, and he put us, human beings, on this earth as his vice regents to steward it, to rule over it. As we said, what does God do in the created order? He brings order out of chaos. He takes the mess, and by his good rulership brings order to it, and then he creates human beings as his vice regents. And what are we to do? We're to continue to bring order out of the chaos around us. Now, ultimately, we aren't God, so we can't do what he can do, but we do have that image. And so the emphasis from the very first pages of the Bible are this is God's created order. It is good, and humans are put here. We could even talk about the unfolding story of the Bible that never has as its theme what you want to be saved for so you can go to heaven when you die. It has instead as its idea that we are with Christ reigning forever in the New Jerusalem that is where? It comes down from heaven back to earth. So somehow we've lost this reality. We've lost this. I remember Denise, your sister, Heather, said this once. She said, Christians should be the biggest celebrators of Earth Day there are. And I thought that was an interesting take, because a lot of times Christians think of that ecological conservation mindset as bad. Instead of seeing, hey, it's actually what we're created. See, we think when we read this that we're vice regents, we have the idea, unfortunately, because of point number 4 that we'll get to in a minute, our warped idea of rulership is rulership, power, and authority means I rule and use my power to get what pleases me. Is that God's rulership, power, and authority? No. That is not how God operates. God doesn't operate creating all that is and bringing order out of chaos so he feels good about himself. No, he creates that which is good and shares it with humans and says, I want you to manage this. I want you to, we see subdue as if we need to get it under our thumb and show it who's boss. That's a warped view of things. And when we start with that warped view, we forget the great responsibility that we have as vice regents with God, and we extend that over other aspects of theology, we get to a wrong conclusion. Namely, that we can't, this world is horrible. God's done with it. Just burn the place down. Let's go. Now, will he one day destroy everything? Everything will be gone. The old order of things will pass away? Absolutely. Absolutely. But for the purpose of putting back the good earth that he created. So that's an important point. I'm sorry, I'm getting some feedback here. I'm going to check my settings. I don't know what's happening necessarily. Is everybody muted? Maybe that's what I'm hearing. If you're not muted, could you? I don't know. I don't hear it anymore, so maybe whatever. Okay. So that was just a little extra from last week that I forgot. How's that? So there we go. This is the foundational. Okay, first 2 chapters of Genesis, all about this. What happens in chapter 3? It all goes, well, I guess, can I say it all goes to hell in church? Is that yeah? Not really, but it goes downhill quick. In fact, from chapter 3 through about chapter 7, it is a steep drop off. Why? Well, because humans, though we're created by God, though we're created in his image, though we're vice regents with God, humans sinned and marred the image of God. Somehow, what happens in the Garden of Eden, what happens with humanity's sin, fundamentally affects that divine image in humanity and corrupts everything. And that corruption, since we're made in the image of God, this goes back to the vice regents and our lack of responsibility, that corruption then kind of bleeds over so that the whole created order is corrupt, so that the scriptures would tell us all of creation groans to be set right again because of the way sin has marred humanity, the vice regents of God. And, let's put it this way. If you're a kingdom and you have a good king, let's go Disney. Yeah. Lion King, right? Mufasa, the James Earl Jones, Darth Vader guy, not really, he's not really. James Earl Jones voice character, the ruler of the Pride Lands, and it's lush and there's balance and it's beautiful. And then his brother Scar has this rebellion against him, plots to get the king executed, is integral in that plot. And what happens to the pridelings? They fall apart. They die. It becomes a wasteland. And this is what happened. When we in the garden are vice regents with God doing it properly, it's lush. It's beautiful. We have a good king. But because of sin, humans, their vice regency is corrupted. And so we see that evidence of corruption everywhere. And so this is huge. Now, the story, you know the story, right? Here's the story. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So here we have Adam and Eve doing the one thing they were told not to do, just like any good 2-year-old, right? It's a good story. It's a familiar story. I mentioned these 3 things a lot. She saw that the fruit was good for food, pleasing to the eye, and desirable for gaining wisdom. That's the logical process that is described for us as she goes. Now, what is the tree? It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And you're familiar, we could go through the whole chapter really and look at it where Satan begins by asking the question, did God really say? Did God really say? The essence of temptation from day one, or not day one, but whatever day that was till today, is did God really say? That we are grappling with this. Now, there's a lot more we could talk about. I'm trying to decide. No, I'm not going to go there. But we have this temptation that starts. It gets Adam and Eve to reevaluate some things. They've been given lots of food in the garden that they've been able to eat. And they probably learned very quickly how to recognize when the fruit is ripe. Oh, there's something about that fruit, the color, the softness, whatever, it's good. So they have this experience. They go, well, this fruit's just like all the other fruit. It's good for food. It's not like it's poisonous or something, even though it was. It's pleasing to the eye. You can see how those go together. They've got this background. But it's really that third one. Hey, God is keeping something from us. That if we eat it, the enemy says, we'll be like God, right? So your vice regents, like you're the prince and he's the king, but you want to mutiny. You're like, this isn't good enough. This is good, but there's more. We think we'd like more. Isn't that humanity in a nutshell? Mm-hmm. That's us. And desirable for gaining wisdom. So she takes it, she eats it, she gives some to Adam, he eats it, and what happens?
Well, the rest is history.
Adam and his wife were both naked, it says at the end of chapter 2, and they felt no shame. We know what shame means. We know what shame feels like. And we see this picture because we know we're in the year 2023. As progressive as our culture maybe is with, avenues of dread. I love was it you that showed me that picture that said, who knew the swimsuits of the 1930s would be the prom dresses of today? So, yes. That's hysterical. We know like fashion has changed and all that sort of thing. But we understand that to be naked, yes, is a physical reality. But I think more than that, maybe if I could use the word exposed. When I use the word exposed, you probably immediately think of that in a negative way. Nobody wants to be exposed. To be exposed, and that's not just physically, oh, I didn't know I had that rip in my pants, in the seat of my pants. That's embarrassing. But to be exposed in any way is the recipe for shame. And so they were completely exposed to each other, but also to God, and they felt no shame. What happens when they eat the fruit? Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked. They didn't even know. They were naked, and they felt no shame. They were exposed, and they didn't realize they were exposed because they had nothing to hide. Now they have something to hide, and they realize they were naked. They feel shame immediately. That's the first thing. So they sewed fig leaves together. And what do? They try to cover up. There it is. We understand shame usually leads to us trying to hide, to cover up. And this is what happens then. They felt no shame because there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Now, the first thing they do is cover themselves. So sin comes in, and you see from chapter 2, verse 25 to chapter 3, verse 7, in a very short time, the whole dynamic of the creation has changed. That's not even getting into the curse of the fall. That's not getting into any of that stuff. What's next? Okay. So this is what has happened. We say they sinned, right? That was our point. Humans sinned and marred the image of God. So the question to consider now is, what is sin? I would probably ask you what is sin, and you would have a lot of answers. But what we're going to do, if you're looking at your notes, you can probably see this is a word study. Because there are a bunch of words for sin in the scriptures. Or the concept that we, in a single word, typically lump all together as sin. So let me just ask real quick, define sin. Can you do that? When I say what is sin, what's your thoughts? And I'm not, this isn't a trick question. I'm not trying to put you on the hook and so I can go, you're wrong. That's not the point. Just literally, what is it?
The opposite of what you're supposed to do.
The opposite of what you're supposed to do. Disobedience.
As they used to say in Latin, it's a no-no.
It's a no-no. Okay. What else? Any other thoughts?
Offensive to God.
Offensive to God. Any online thoughts? Or are y'all happy to be anonymous out there?
I agree with the last one. Against God's wishes.
Against God's wishes. Okay. Good. So that's kind of our idea. And all of that is true, right? All of those things are what we think of when we say sin. That those things have to do. But what I want to do is look at three concepts that are both in the Hebrew Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and the New Testament. So a Hebrew word and a Greek word that are roughly equivalent. How do we get the equivalence? Part of it is when they translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek, we can do some of that. But we also just have word roots and etymology and that sort of thing. And this is going to, I hope, give us a different, not different, I don't mean different, a fuller picture of sin. Because we reduce it in many ways to I should do this, but I did this, and so I've sinned. And that's a part of it. I'm not saying it's not. But let's look at some concepts. So first, a Hebrew word. Here's the Hebrew word. It reads from left or right to left, not left to right. And here's the like phonetic pronunciation. This first letter is one where you got to spit on somebody to say. It's a guttural, so you got to. It's not a ch. It's got a guttural. Ha to ha. So it even sounds not nice, doesn't it?
I was thinking, I was like,
like if you did that to me, I'd say you've sinned against me. I know you did. Right there. The Greek word is hamartia. So Greek letters. The definition, as it were, of that is to sin, of course, and particularly the image is to miss the mark, or we might say fall short.
Isn't sin an arrow term too?
Is it? Sort of.
Isn't it?
Judges chapter 20. Among all these soldiers, these are Benjaminite soldiers. It's talking about the tribe of Benjamin. Among all these soldiers, there were 700 select troops who were left-handed. Uh-oh, that's not good. No, I'm just kidding. Left-handed isn't bad.
That's not bad.
Each of whom could sling a stone at a hare and not sin. Not ha-ta-ah. Okay? Not miss is the English translation in that video. So this word, miss, it's in the negative, is the word in Hebrew for sin, ha-ta-ah. Okay? So why do I show you this? Because words have semantic range. They have a wide breadth of meaning. And so we take a word, in this case, like hata'a, and we see it here in a, not an arrow, but in this case, a slingshot. So an aim, we're trying to aim. They sling a stone at a hare, not H-A-R-E, like a rabbit, but a hare. And they do not miss. They do not sin. Exodus 20:20, Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from hata'ah, from sinning. So you see, this word in this verse, you would probably never, some we don't see in English. You would never say, oh, that means sin. It's the same word in Hebrew that is used in Exodus 20 is the 10 Commandments chapter, right? This is the 10 Commandments. That's how that starts. So God, don't be afraid. God has come to test you, so the fear of God will keep you from sinning. So you see that idea that the marksman never misses, doesn't sin. We need to also be aware we can miss. Probably the most famous verse about sin is Romans 3:23, for all have sinned, and this is hamartia, the Greek equivalent of hata'ah, and fall short. Even can you see it that way? Fall short of the glory of God. Is that it? Okay. So we see this idea. This concept of sin is missing the mark, falling short. There's something that we're aiming at, and we don't quite get there. Now, of course, you would expect we could talk about what are we aiming at? Well, say obedience, God's word, God's law, God's instruction, whatever phrase you'd like to give there, you can see that we should do this, and we know, and part of the idea here isn't we don't do what we should do, but it's also that no matter how hard we try, we can't do what we should do. You see, there's a little difference there. That we fall short. That doesn't mean, when you think, oh, that just fell short. Now think about it. Let's say I have a slingshot and I'm trying to hit the fire alarm. And I swing it and throw it, and it lands like 3 inches under it. Just short, we would say, right? Now, you would say, that's pretty good. You tried hard, you were pretty close. Is that different in our mind than if I took my slingshot and threw it and it went that way? Yeah, see, this is how we look at sin. We're supposed to aim that way when we go that way. As if, and there is the intentional breaking of God's law. But part of the idea of sin is that we're aiming the right way, but we still don't quite get there because we can't quite get there. We fall short of, to use that word, or we miss the mark. You see how that's a little different than just sin is I'm supposed to do this and do this. Another way that we see that is in James chapter 4. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, guess what it is? It is sin. It is falling short. It is hamartia for them. Now this is, we often talk about sin in this way. There are sins of commission, preacher-wise, and sins of omission. These are things I did wrong. I committed a sin. It says, thou shalt not lie, and I lied. I committed a sin. And we think, oh, that's bad, right? But this tells us we can know what we ought to do. It doesn't say you did the opposite. It just says you didn't do it. You just chose not to do it. That's a little different, right? That's the falling short. That's not the outright rebellion running the other way. That's also sinful. I'm not saying that's not, right? But it's showing us that even just knowing here's it's an old joke, an old preacher story. It's not really a joke. It's not super funny.
All right.
I'm not trying to be funny, but it makes the point. Like, preacher got a new church first Sunday, opened his Bible, and preached a sermon. People loved it. Oh, that was a great sermon, Pastor. Great. They came back his second Sunday. He preached the exact same sermon. And the people were a little like, That's all. Maybe he was just a busy week. Maybe he was confused. I don't know. But like, preacher, good job, good job. Came back week 3. Guess what he did? The exact same. So now there's a little. He did this twice now. What is he doing? Came back the 4th week. Guess what he did? Exact same sermon. Now somebody has the guts. They kind of got together and they had the chairman of the deacons or whoever it was in their church to say something to the pastor. And they pulled him aside and said, Pastor, we don't mean to be disrespectful. We just have a question. You've been here, this is your 4th week here, and you've preached the exact same sermon every week. Can you explain that to us? He said, I will. So when you start obeying this one, we'll move on to the next one. Okay? We save a lot of prep time. Maybe that preacher was smarter than we give credit. But the point is, you know the good you ought to do, and you're not doing it. So I'm just going to keep preaching the sermon until you do it. Right? We understand this. In our own lives, there are plenty. And this wasn't a joke. This was something that I heard, and I don't remember where. Might have been at a conference or something like that, where the person was talking to people that have been in church a long time, and they started by saying, "Let's see how many verses you have memorized," and just invited people to stand up and quote memory verses. And it was a church world kind of a place, so there were lots of memory verses quoted. And the pastor at the end, or the preacher at the end of that said, that was wonderful. That was exciting. Now, here's my question. You just quoted 100 Bible verses. Do you obey all of them? Or do you just know them? Do we obey even the ones we know? We know the good we ought to do. We fall short. We miss the mark. Part of sin is that very much we even are trying. We want to. But there's something about the image of God in us marred by sin that prohibits us from doing that. Again, a little different than outright rebellion, but nonetheless there. So let's I'm sorry. Second idea. The Greek word is anomia. So I'm going to give you the definition first, and then we'll back up and talk Hebrew. The definition of this, if you want to use a sin word, it's iniquity. So the first word sin, the second word iniquity, those are Bible words, right? The first word sin, missed the mark. Iniquity, lawlessness. So you see the A, which is a negative prefix, right? You're an atheist, right? That A means not a believer in God.
And that literally there.
Nomia means law. So this is not a person who follows the law. Lawlessness. Okay? So the etymology, the meaning of the Greek word helps us understand why it's called lawlessness. Against the law. Right? So this, doesn't that sound more like rebellion? Like the speed limit is on this road what?
45.
What's the average pace?
60.
Not counting for construction. Right? We understand. What do you set your cruise control? I'm on the interstate. It's 70. I probably have my cruise control set a few miles an hour over 70. I'm lawless. I'm breaking the law. The Hebrew idea, very short word, avin or avin, depending on how you want to say it, that has this idea, iniquity, in mind, that is not. This is not like like hamartia and hata'ah are kind of almost word for word equivalents. This is more conceptually, this is the basis for lawlessness. How does that work? So let's first talk about the Greek word, anomia. Matthew 7, one of the saddest, harshest verses in Scripture, Matthew 7, verse 23. This is, many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Your name cast out demons. And I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers, is the translation in NIV. This is you lawless, right? So evildoers and lawless, can you see the connection? That's falling short is when I throw it at that with my sling and I just miss. Lawlessness is saying, I'm not aiming at that. I want to aim over here because I like this aim better. So it's different. Both are sin. Both are problematic. But nonetheless, this is so by the way, this is a quote from the Psalm. It's not identified in most of our Bibles. Psalm verse 6, verse 8. Away from me, all you who do evil. That word evil is our Hebrew word. That's a connection. So there is sort of a connection between the Hebrew word avin and anomia. We see it in Jesus quoting, though not directly. This is you won't find this footnoted in your Bible, but it's there. So let's talk about that avin word in Hebrew. One meaning of that word is hardship or difficulty. So, for instance, it shows up in Job. For hardship does not spring from the soil, nor does trouble spout from the ground. So hardship and trouble, both of those words, have as the Hebrew word that avin word. So part of the meaning has to do with trouble. Now what's happening in Job's life? What's happening? Is it a good time or a bad time for Job? It's bad, right? His life has been full of trouble. Is it because he was disobedient? Right? So that's the whole thing. Have you considered my servant Job? Right? So this word that is connected from the Hebrew to the Greek word for lawlessness has a connection to difficulty that isn't necessarily of our own doing. Job's difficulty, and we see it in Job 18, you can see the same idea there. Job's hardship, Job's trouble does not spring from his disobedience. But what happens when we get in trouble and we didn't do anything wrong? Anybody find that experience pleasant? We begin to think to ourselves, don't we? We begin to think, I'm trying my best. I didn't do anything wrong, and this happened. That's not fair. And from that's not fair, we can move to, well, then why am I trying so hard? If this is what I get, even when I've done nothing wrong, why does it matter what I do? Right? So we get to Psalm 66. Or excuse me, Isaiah 66. But whoever sacrifices a bull is like one who kills a person. What? And whoever offers a lamb is like one who breaks a dog's neck. Whoever makes a grain offering is like one who presents pig's blood. And whoever burns memorial incense is like one who worships an idol. What? What's going on here? Isaiah 66. They have chosen their own ways, and they delight in their abominations. This idea, worships an idol, is our Hebrew word. Avin. So Isaiah is not saying to sacrifice is like killing a person or breaking a dog's neck or presenting pig's blood. We know this is bad, right? We know this is bad. And we know this is bad. Right? We know all that. We know this is bad. Why is Isaiah saying this? Well, it's that last phrase. They have chosen their own ways, and they delight in their abominations. Israel has trouble. Israel has hardship. And they're supposed to be God's people. And they, in their hardship, have decided this whole God thing isn't working out, so let's consider some other options. Baal, Asherah. All of those are idols, right? And we know what happens. Isaiah is warning them, look, this isn't going to end well because of your disobedience, of your lawlessness, of your evil, of your worship of an idol. God will punish you, right? God will send you to exile because you thought you had it hard then. It's only good. So I want to, and I hope you see a little bit the connection that I'm trying to build here, because for most people, and I'm talking This is to Israel. This is to God's people. So I'm talking to us, us Christian folk, us believers, right? For most people, we don't get up in the morning and say, I want to be disobedient today. I want to sin today. I want to do the opposite of what God tells me today. But we do have hardship, and we do have struggle. We do have trouble. Some of it makes no sense. Nothing, we can't trace it to, you know what? Yeah, okay, I messed up. That's not good. And so sometimes in our hardship and in our trouble, we begin to form a worldview. We begin to form a frame of reference outside of God. We try to figure out what doesn't make sense under our faith banner. And what we do eventually is aven. We worship an idol. We worship something besides God. Idols can be good things, by the way. An idol doesn't have to be something horrible. You know, we usually think Baal, Asherah, evil things that the Hindu. People can make idols out of their career, out of their family, out of a relationship, out of their children, out of all those are good things. They can become idols. And what happens? They become idols because we redirect our lives away from God's law toward our own ideals. That's the lawlessness of sin. And so it's not sin. Yes, there are people that have no knowledge of God, that have no use for God, and would just assume do whatever they want and thumb their nose at God. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. That is sin. That is certainly falling short in every possible way. That is worthy of God's judgment and wrath. So is this. So is anomia and aven. Third, what is sin? Whoops. Hebrew word. Pesha. No, not that word. Pesha. Greek word. Paraptoma, for what it's worth. Meaning transgression or trespass. So sin, iniquity, transgression. Those are three kind of sin words that we use. I've tried to give you another word with it to explain it a little differently. Sin becomes missing the mark, falling short. Iniquity becomes lawlessness. Transgression becomes trespass. Now, Denise got on me a while ago because I was preaching and I was using the word trespass for sin. I was saying, your trespasses, your trespasses. She said, listen, your audience, I don't remember why the audience was made up of the way it was, but she was looking at the audience. The people in the audience had no idea what you meant. They were wondering whose property they went on they shouldn't have. And I'm like, that's a good point, because that's a church word, right? Trespass in our mind is a church word that we understand. Forgive us our trespasses. We even, some versions of the Lord's Prayer. You remember that, right? I'm not making this up. Okay, good. Do you remember why?
Yeah.
I don't either. I was trying to. So, but I think in this context, we can see how that secular idea of trespass connects to the idea of sin. What is think of it from the point of view of a trespass. What does it mean that you've been, like we have people tonight that have been trespassed from businesses? What does that mean for them? Like, why are you squinting? That's not a good question. What does it mean if you're trespassing in our cultural legal world? Maybe I'll ask the question now.
You go on to somebody else's property that you're not supposed to be on.
Here's a line.
Right.
That's what's on that side is theirs, and you're not supposed to be over there.
Correct.
And you go over there. So the people that are trespassed are hanging out and doing things on business properties. And so the business calls the police, and they're given a trespass order, and they can't go on that property anymore. And if they do, they could get in trouble. So we understand what that means. So let's go to these words and see if we can follow them. Amos, one of the minor prophets, he begins his book 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times with this phrase. And I put Damascus in brackets because that word changes each time. So in chapter 1, in fact, rather than, it's really quite an amazing rhetorical device. So the word here, sins, is our word in Hebrew that we just looked at that I forgot real quick. So I got to go back and look at it. Oh, Pesha. I should know Pesha. So for 3 Peshas, for 3 trespasses, for 3 sins of Damascus, even for 4, I will not relent. And then you go to verse 6, and it says, for 3 sins of Gaza. Well, that's newsworthy these days, isn't it? Verse 9, for 3 sins of Tyre. Verse 11, for 3 sins of Edom. What's he doing? When you think about this, Damascus, that's Syria. Gaza, we know where that is. Tyre, that's on the coast, just north of Israel. Edom, that's out toward the desert. From there to verse 13, for 3 sins of Ammon, another of the surrounding nations of Israel. Chapter 2, verse 1, for 3 sins of Moab. That's another. So you're thinking, if you're the people getting this, you're going, yeah, tell them, Amos. You tell all those sinners all around us, all those Assyrians and Moabites and Edomites and whoever else ites, how bad they are. And then guess what happens? For 3 sins of Judah, even for 4. And then verse 6, for 3 sins of Israel, even for 4. So rhetorically, Amos is brilliant. He set them up. It's like, I know the crowd that we have on Sunday, and I could get up, and I've done this a few times, and I could rail against a certain thing that would get everybody riled up. That's what Amos is doing, right? They're like, yeah, we don't like the Syrians. We don't like the Moabites. We don't like the Ammonites. We don't like the Gazaites. We don't like them. So yeah, get it to them, Amos. And then what does Amos do? Points right back at him. Oh, but Judah, you're no different. And oh, but Israel, you're no different. It's great stuff, right? So this idea, Pesha, what does he say these people are doing? So you got this rhetorical device. What are some of the sins of Damascus? She threshed Gilead with sledges having iron teeth. That doesn't sound good. Does that sound like she trespassed in Gilead? Maybe a little bit. What are the sins of Gaza? Because she took captive whole communities and sold them to Edom. Does that sound like she trespassed? Does that sound like they crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed? For 3 sins of Tyre, because she sold whole communities of captives. Same thing as Gaza. For 3 sins of Edom, because he pursued his brothers with a sword. With a sword? Sword. What was that word? Say that word.
Sword? There was an L, sword.
What is the word? Somebody seriously say it.
I assume it's sword.
Sword, that's it. Wow.
I'll write that.
And slaughtered the women because
it's document that little whatever brain thing you got.
That was a tick. For 3 sins of Ammon, because he ripped open the pregnant woman of Gilead in order to extend his borders. Does that sound like trespass? A little bit. For 3 sins of Moab, because he burned to ashes the bones of Edom's king. That sounds like a trespass. Somebody stepped over the boundaries. They shouldn't be there. For 3 sins of Judah, because they have rejected the law of the Lord and not kept his decrees. Right? So what's Amos? It's brilliant. He is lining up all of these surrounding nations and showing their trespass, how they've stepped over the line. Most of the lines here are physical border, national lines. In addition to like some moral lines, right? Ripping open pregnant women. I don't know if that's ever been cool. That's just cruel. That's just evil. And then he turns to Judah and says, oh no, but you have rejected the law of the Lord. He says to Israel, you sell the innocent for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. What's that trespass? So you trample on the heads of the poor as on the dust of the ground, and deny justice to the oppressed. Ooh, now there's a line, right? So again, Amos, this isn't an Amos sermon or study, brilliant rhetorically. To take this idea, this trespass, the lines that we're not supposed to cross, pointing around all the ones around Israel, and then turning very pointedly to Israel and Judah and saying, you're guilty too. So Pesha, you see the idea of trespass in there, and transgress, that idea connected together. What's next? Matthew. So when we get to the New Testament idea, of this trespass, paraptoma, we get to right after the Lord's Prayer. What does Jesus say? For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. So our job is to what? Forgive what? When people, this is our trespass, our transgression. When people cross lines they shouldn't have crossed, to use that kind of more familiar. But if you do not forgive others when they cross the line, your Father will not do what for you? Forgive when you cross it. That's tough. But several times, this word in Greek is on the lips of Jesus in this vein. If you have something, if you're at the altar ready to make a gift, and your brother has something against you, this is the word. What are you to do? Leave the gift, go be made right with your brother, then come back and offer your gift. So Pesha and paraptoma, trust. So what have we done? We tried to build a case. What is sin? So I hope if I've done a little bit of homework well, your view of sin hopefully grew a little bit. Like, what does it mean to sin? It's not just, I know I shouldn't lie and I lie. Or I know I shouldn't commit adultery. And then Jesus said, I shouldn't look at a woman lustfully, and I did, so poof, I've sinned. I'm as good as, we got those down, right? And so the problem with that's one aspect of sin. It doesn't capture this idea that sometimes our sin, actually there's a passage, did I write in my notes? Oh, I meant to say this because this is a good one too. Exodus 22, verses 7 through 9, talks about a situation where you go away and you entrust your neighbor with your property, right? If you entrust your neighbor with your property and somebody breaks in and steals something from you under your neighbor's care, that is called robbery. That's called theft, right? However, if while you're gone, in your absence, your neighbor takes advantage of your absence and takes something of yours, you know what that is? Pesha. Pesha. It's trespass because you've crossed a line. Robbery's wrong, right? Pesha in that context is worse because it involves relationship that should be had with your neighbor that you shouldn't do it. If we go back to the Amos passage, it's about all those things of trespass. They're usually about relationship. We go to Jesus's words about forgiving. What's it about? Relationship. Pesha has to do primarily, and then the Hebrew, the Greek word paraptoma has to do with relational breaks, crossing relational lines that should keep us from doing that. So sin is, yes, disobedience, anomia, or awen, lawlessness. You know what you should do, and you choose to do something else for whatever reason. Sometimes because it's trouble, sometimes it's because you're on your own. But it's also trespass. It's also transgression. It's a relational reality. It's a relational boundary that we shouldn't cross, that we're always kind of pushing the edges on. Is adultery is kind of a pesha crime. That's a relational boundary we shouldn't cross. And then there's hamartia. There's falling short. It's not that you're not trying to please God and do what he says. It's that you're ultimately not really able to. Which brings us to our last point, something we call original sin. Now, the original sin is not Adam and Eve in the apple. Original sin is a bigger concept. It's that humans inherited from Adam an innate tendency towards sin. So original sin means, we talk about original, it's an Augustinian idea. He's the one that wrote the most about it. Romans 5:12 is a good place that you got to put it in. Therefore, just as sin entered the world, how? Through one man, and death through sin. And in this way, death came to all people because all sinned. So somehow in Adam, all sinned is original sin. Like, we're born with a sin nature. We're not sinners because we sin. We sin because we're sinners.
Say that again?
We're not sinners because we sin. We sin because we're sinners.
You were born a sinner, therefore you will sin.
Our nature
Okay.
leaves us no choice but to sin. That's hamartia. No matter how hard I try, I'm never going to get there. I'm just going to be half an inch even off, but I'm off. Original sin is this idea. I'm running later than I wanted to, so one last verse and then we'll be done. As it is written, there is no one righteous, not even one. There is no one who understands. There's no one who seeks God. All have turned away. They have altogether become worthless. There is no one who does good, not even one. Their throats are open graves. Their tongues practice deceit. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. Ruin and misery mark their ways, and the way of peace they do not know. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Romans chapter 3. Here's what I want you to notice. Notice these quotation marks. Quotation mark, in quotation mark. That's an Old Testament quote. Quotation mark, in quotation mark. Another Old Testament quote. Quotation, quotation. A third Old Testament quote. Quotation, quotation. A fourth quotation, quotation. This is not Paul original. This is Paul the Pharisee quoting for us, the Hebrew Bible, reminding us all of this is true. That who's included in no one? So if no one is righteous, that means y'all aren't, right? So our is it Jeremiah that says the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked? Who can know it? There's something at our very core that's wrong. We're made in the image of God, but we've sinned, and sin has marred us. And it's marred not just me, but it's marred the entire human race from the time Adam and Eve in the garden sinned through, well, what do we do about sin? Maybe that's a good question. We'll talk about that in January. Because we're not meeting next week. The week between Christmas and New Year's, just lock yourself in your house and hope for the best. Down here in the Keys, right? I don't know, it feels crazy. So not meeting next week. This will be the end of our Anthropology, the Doctrine of Humanity study. So that's 3 we've done. I think we'll pick up with Christology and then soteriology early on next year. So that's our plan. Any comments, questions, or suggestions? Or complaints, I guess.
I just want to make a comment about countries that you mentioned maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes ago, that the countries are there today around Israel, and struggles are the same. When was that written? That was
Amos is
Old Testament.
Yeah, 500 BC.
When in the countries,
The more things change,
they're still there.
the more things stay the same.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that's surprising.
Online, ladies, we good?
We're
Thumbs
good.
up.
See you Sunday.
All right. Very good. I'm going to pray and then we'll call it a night.
Sure.
Father in heaven, we thank you for your love and grace that you've extended to us through your son, Jesus. And Lord, we are reminded tonight, certainly, of the reality we don't really need to be reminded much about because we're very aware of our sinfulness. But Lord, I thank you as well that what is fundamentally true about us is that we're made in your image. And because of that, we have the capacity to have a relationship with you so that in spite of our sin, Father, there is hope, there is forgiveness, and there is salvation. We are grateful for that tonight. We're grateful for the gift of Jesus this time of year, especially as we have at the forefront of our minds his birth, his entering into human flesh, the God that became man. Lord, thank you for that indescribable gift of grace. given to us. I pray, Lord, that you'll bless each of us the rest of this week as we finalize preparations for observing Christmas, as we go about the busyness of this season. And we ask that we would also find in this season time spent with the one who loved us enough to send his son to redeem us and to forgive us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.